Good afternoon, and thanks for taking time out of your busy studies at the School of Social Work or the Law School to be with us this afternoon. We are a wonderfully rich community at Boston College for the variety of folks interested in all things about immigration as well as issues of justice in a variety of size, shapes, and forms. Certainly today relates to an issue that's both incredibly relevant as we talk about a country of 43 million foreign-born. I say to my classes all the time, there are only 38 million people who live in all of Canada. We're talking about a massive population when we talk about the foreign-born in the United States. And the issues of social justice take many, many forms and fashions, and certainly talking about immigrant integration is my bread and butter, but talking about immigrant exploitation is really talking about the vulnerability that I see and hear reported all the time. Let me remind you that it starts way before arriving. I was talking to families and I was thinking about components of stories I've heard in the last few months as a family talked about their story of leaving their home country and having to sell the house. They got 15 cents on the dollar, 15% of what they had paid for the same house. They sold all their goods because they had to have cash for their migration. They sold that for whatever they could get, which was virtually pennies on the dollar. They put themselves in a position where the first driver that they had to use to get to a border charged them 4 times the going rate, and they had no choices that they could have come up with. They put themselves in a situation where they paid for water transit out of their country to another country for just $1,000 each, only to find that it was an open boat with no toilets and actually no life jackets either, but for an extra $25 they could get a life jacket, which proved not to be a floatable device. So by the time they got to the United States, they were very ready for this to be the promised land, but the promised land proved to be a little different than their expectations and their hopes. They found themselves first doubled up with another family, co-ethnic family, and but the landlord managed to get double the rent for that apartment, so it wasn't a great bargain. They put themselves in a situation where he did find a job only to be asked to leave after a very short time because a quarrel broke out on the work floor, and of course they immediately blamed the new guy for the problem, even though he said they were the ones shouting at me, they were the ones saying terrible things. He found himself in a situation where getting that second job was much harder, and in a moment of disruption, he turned over a table and struck his wife, who fell to the floor. Of course, she did not call about domestic violence or abuse. She understood her husband's rage and his upset. She felt the same way when he did it again, not too long afterwards, still being more than upset and unable to control his frustration and his anger. Police departments of the United States report some 67% of them agree that crime in the immigrant community is underreported. So we are talking about a large sociological phenomenon that finds its way into the countless other business transactions, from cashing a paycheck to dealing with sending remittances, where immigrants feel themselves at the powerless end of capitalism and in a position to do very little to protect themselves from all the things that happen to them. Hearing countless stories, I thought it was important for us to find a way to address the issue of immigrant exploitation, and I was delighted to discover that the FTC was at the same time reaching out to make known a bunch of new resources. So Robin Eichen was kind enough to come up from New York to be with us today and to share with us some of the resources that have been developed. Robin's been with the Federal Trade Commission in the Northeast region since 1990. In September 2003, she received the Director's Award in recognition for her work in the consumer protection area. She's been the legal services representative for our region. She's been running a program that's every community initiative and has really taken on issues of many types of consumer protection. In September 2016, she received the FTC's Janet Steger Award for participation in every community. We're very pleased she's with us, even though she's a graduate of St. John University School of Law. We accept people of all kinds of sizes, stripes, and alma maters. Robin, welcome to Boston College and School of Law. We're happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Westy. I'm so happy to be here today to talk to you all and to share what the FTC can help you with, and to help to share what we can do for consumers. So, for those who don't know much about the FTC, we're a national consumer protection agency. Our headquarters are in Washington, but I'm at one of the 8 regional offices that's headquartered in New York, and Massachusetts is part of our region. We have, our region encompasses all of the New England states, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, New York, and New Jersey. So what do? We protect consumers from fraud and deception, and we do it in several different ways. One way is we bring cases against companies and individuals that defraud consumers, including immigrants. And we do that in order to recover money that we can redistribute to consumers as what we call consumer redress, refunds of what they paid the bad guys. We also have policy initiatives, which I'm going to talk about, and we have great consumer education materials that can be bulk ordered for free. I'm happy to help anybody with an order. My contact information is in this PowerPoint. So, and our consumer protection materials are available. Almost everything, or everything's available in English and Spanish, and the immigration materials are available in 5 other languages. So, okay, so what are some of the common scams that we see against immigrant communities? Well, there's immigration services frauds. That's unauthorized, unqualified, or corrupt people that promise immigrants that they can help them stay in the country, get a green card, or other services. Mortgage or debt relief, including student debt relief, we've seen that a lot. These companies ask for upfront fees and then they don't deliver. So people lose their money and sometimes they're worse off than before. There are also business opportunity scams, false claims that purchasers can make lots of money, but again, they pay an upfront fee or several fees, and they don't get what they're promised. Or we've seen prepaid calling cards, cards that are offered to immigrants so that they can call their countries, but the cards don't have the minutes that are promised, or they expire quickly. And we've brought cases at the FTC against those types of companies. So I'm also going to talk about imposter scams. That's a big one we've been seeing at the FTC against immigrants and against other kinds of other consumers as well. That's where a scammer falsely claims to be related, a government official, a court official, a relative even, a credit card company, bank, or utility. And I'm going to show you a brief clip from the FTC's website about a phantom debt collector. That's a debt collector that tries to collect debts that may not even be owed by consumers and threatens with arrest, threatens consumers with arrest or other dire consequences. So, here's the video.
Recibí una llamada en la cual me decían que yo tenía una demanda por $4,000. Si yo no pagaba eso, me iban a mandar con inmigración y que, bueno, eso iba a ser catastrófico. Pues yo me asusté mucho, me asusté tanto que le digo, casi corría yo a la tienda de la esquina a comprar el money order y ya quería que estuviera la gente por el money order y que se fueran. Cuando yo platiqué con mi hijo, él inmediatamente me dijo, ¿sabes qué, mamá? Esto no es real.
Pues empecé a buscar el número en la computadora. El mismo número que le estaba marcando mi mamá tenía muchas quejas. Y de hecho una de las quejas era casi idéntica.
Una estafa de impostor es cuando una persona le dice que tiene alguna afiliación o que es incluso el gobierno, le dice que tiene una deuda pendiente y que tiene que pagar cierto dinero y normalmente es un sentido de urgencia, es páguelo ya inmediatamente. A la señora Juárez, igual que a otras personas, la convencen con amenazas, diciéndole que si no pagan la deuda van a ser llevados a corte o pueden ser encarcelados.
Yo estoy agradecida, gracias a Dios que tenía a mi lado, en primer lugar para exteriorizar lo que me estaba pasando, compartirlo con mi hijo y con mi esposo. Me sentí muy apoyada simplemente al exteriorizarlo, ¿verdad? Al compartirlo.
Nosotros presentamos una demanda contra la empresa y después de toda la evidencia que pudimos juntar gracias a las declaraciones de personas como la señora Juárez, el juez determinó que sí, la empresa estaba involucrada en fraude al consumidor y la empresa fue cerrada permanentemente.
A mí me da mucha tristeza que personas se presten para este tipo de estafas. Les aconsejo que platiquen esto con personas que consideren ellos que puede estar un poco más informada.
Si usted recibe una llamada de alguien que no conoce y le piden que envíe dinero ya sea por una tarjeta prepagada, con un giro postal o en efectivo, no lo haga.
Okay, thank you. Technology. Anyway, just to point out what we highlight in the video, these are common characteristics of imposter scams. Urgency. They make you do something right away. Pay the money right away. You don't have time to check out the information with somebody you know, on a website you know, a phone number you know. You got to pay it right away. This woman didn't pay it right away, and that's why she escaped losing money. They want immediate payment. They usually want that immediate payment in a way that can't be traced or recovered by cash, by a wire transfer, now they're asking for iTunes cards. So know that that's a possible sign of a scam. And they pretend to be calling from a federal agency, such as the IRS. We've seen lots. I've gotten calls like that. And those government agencies never call people to ask for money. If the IRS thinks you owe money, they'll send a letter. And the last thing is that they often have some information that may make them seem legitimate. They might get something from social media. They may spoof a phone number to make it look like it's coming from Washington or even the consumer's own home. Okay, I'm now going to talk about the FTC's Every Community project, which I've been involved with and I'm happy to be involved with. We examine how certain groups of people, immigrants, seniors, service members and veterans and other low-income consumers may become fraud victims. And this grew out of the FTC's research that showed that African American and Hispanics were more likely to be victims of fraud, but much less likely to report it to the FTC. And we were concerned about that. So I just asked the group, how come immigrants don't complain to the FTC or government agencies? I don't have much time to explore this with questions, but having asked that question before, people have told me that they're afraid to speak to the government. They're afraid that government will report them, and we won't report them at the FTC. We only ask for as much information as they're comfortable providing, and an agency can complain to the FTC on behalf of consumers. So we are looking for ways to encourage immigrants to complain to government agencies. We want to find out what scams are out there, and we want to bring more cases and develop more targeted materials. Okay. Now, the FTC's research showed that certain scams that were broadly targeted to a lot of populations happen to affect more low-income consumers and more African-American and Hispanic consumers, and that there were other scams that were actually targeted to those populations, such as immigration services frauds. So we want to know why those scams would affect those populations at the FTC. And if there's time, I want to answer that question. So how are these consumers targeted? That's another question we want to know. What I've heard, though, is sometimes these consumers are targeted by people in their own communities. And so we need to be mindful of that they don't trust, say, we've seen scams where immigrants were told that items could be shipped through a shipping company that they were familiar with one of their countrymen. However, the shipment never arrived, and the packages were stolen, and that was because they trusted somebody in their own community. They wouldn't ship with UPS or FedEx. So the FTC released a report that's called Combating Fraud in the African American and Latino communities, and it's a strategic plan to help rectify that situation. And the way we're doing that is I personally and others are going to churches, schools, and libraries to speak to people and encourage them to speak to each other about the frauds so that they're not victimized, and to report those scams to the FTC. We also had an ethnic media briefing in New York, and we've been doing that throughout the country. And we did that this year in New York. We also have a policy initiative which is called the Legal Services Collaboration. And that way, we try to leverage the resources that are not the inadequate resources that legal services groups have to help consumers by getting their complaints to the greatest extent possible and bringing cases, developing consumer-friendly materials, and we've done that with the help of legal services attorneys. We've developed and I'll be talking about that later. We also provide training, webinars, continuing legal education programs for legal services attorneys, and we have a guide that many have used to help legal services attorneys help their clients get out of problems with identity theft. That's a resource guide, and there's a link in my presentation. So we also have written materials and interactive videos and audios on consumer.gov, which is the materials that we developed in conjunction with legal services organizations. We have materials on notarial fraud, debt collection, money wiring, job scams, and they're really simple. It's what it is, what to know, and what to do. So it's really, really simple. It's available by audio, so you don't even have to read them. And we have, and on those websites, we have resources for both consumers and advocates. We also have specific materials devoted to immigration services and other scams against immigrants. And some of them are pictured on the slide. Those are the websites for them. We have video, audio, and these materials are available in English and 5 other languages, including Spanish. We don't have all of our materials, or nearly all, are available in Spanish, but the immigration materials are available also in other languages. A great material that we have now is Fotonovelas. They're to raise awareness about scams targeting the Latino community. You can see some of them. Every time we find out about a scam targeting the Latino community, we look to develop a new fotonovela. So 2 of them are new. I think the car buying trouble is new, and I don't remember what other one was new, but these can be ordered, again, for free. Everything is available for free on our website, our bulk order website, as many as you need. Okay, next. Again, they're free and they're in the public domain. That means you can put your own logos on it. You can use as much or as little as you want. They're in Spanish and in other languages. So here's something new. I'm involved in the task force of an organization called Tiny Protecting Immigrant New Yorkers. Now, it's a New York organization, but they encourage us to circulate their materials, which I'm circulating the link for the resource guide for people that help immigrants. So they have many organizations, their government, their district attorneys, USCIS is involved as well, the FTC, and we meet monthly to see how we can better help immigrants. They have a hotline for complaints, and it's managed by Catholic Charities in New York. And what's great is that complaint line feeds into our Consumer Sentinel database. So the FTC is able to use that to see what's happening in the marketplace and how immigrants and others are victimized. This is about our website. It's a national website. It's used throughout the country. We have millions of complaints. Usually the most prevalent complaint is identity theft. This is for consumers nationwide, but debt collection is a big one. We have dozens of contributors of other government agencies, some legal services organizations, state attorneys general, the Better Business Bureau, and government agencies can access the complaints to bring cases. And there are more than 13 million complaints from 2010 to 2015. Although the FTC doesn't resolve individual complaints, other agencies that access our database do. Again, we bring cases, but it has to be a pattern or practice, and there has to be interstate commerce involved. So here's a slide that just shows complaints about one type of fraud against immigrants, which is immigration services fraud. Again, it has our phone hotline at 1-877-FTC-HELP, and you can access it in English or Spanish, and they have dedicated counselors to help file a complaint. So I'm just going to quickly talk about a couple of some of the cases that the FTC has brought against people that victimize immigrants. Here on this slide, there are 2 cases against immigration services providers, one in Maryland and one in Nevada. On the first case, Loma International, the court, at the FTC's request, the court ordered the defendants to pay $616,000 in refunds to defrauded consumers, and banned the defendants from providing any immigration services to consumers in the future. Similarly, the case against Immigration Center involved some imposter scam, also against immigrants. Claiming to be the U.S. government, they asked consumers to pay $200 to $2,500 for fees that they alleged were from the USCIS. Well, here again, the court banned the defendants from providing any immigration services and also required them to surrender assets for refunds to consumers. I'm going to show a short video about this, about immigration services scams.
Hi, I'm Monica Baca, an Assistant Director for the Federal Trade Commission. One of the most common scams that we see are the people who offer to provide immigration services, but they are not authorized to provide those services. They will charge you a fee for doing that, but they will often bungle your paperwork. Sometimes they will pretend to be lawyers. Sometimes they will call themselves notarios to convince you that they are able to provide that assistance to you. The other type of scam that we see are fake government websites. These are websites that look legitimate, but they're not legitimate. Their website addresses do not end in .gov, and these people cannot help you. And then the third type of scam that we see are the individuals and businesses that charge you money for free government forms. You should not be paying money for free government forms. In Latin America, the term notario refers to a highly specialized lawyer. In this country, notarios or notary publics are not lawyers. They're not authorized to provide you with immigration services, and you should not be paying them a fee to do so. So people who get scammed will of course lose the money that they have invested. Whatever fees they have paid will be gone. But more importantly, for a lot of people, their immigration status can be jeopardized by filling out the wrong form, by missing a deadline, by having incorrect information on a form. A person's immigration status can be put in significant jeopardy. The immigration process is complicated, and so it's worth investing some time into looking for the right kind of help. Look for a lawyer, preferably an immigration lawyer in good standing. You can also look for an accredited representative at a recognized organization. These folks will charge you fees for their services, but there may be organizations in your area that can provide you with free or low-cost assistance. You can find help with immigration services by going to ftc.gov/immigration. Start there. That will give you links to many places you can go to look for the right people. If you see a scam, please report it to the Federal Trade Commission. You can report it at ftc.gov. You can report it in English or Spanish. We know that some people are nervous about providing too much information, but people should feel free to provide whatever information they feel comfortable providing. The most important things to know are, first of all, notarios are not lawyers. Do not pay them for immigration services. Second, if you see a scam, report it to the FTC at ftc.gov. Third, go to the FTC website for assistance in finding somebody who can help you. Go to ftc.gov/immigration.
Okay. Okay, so that basically highlights what we do to help consumers avoid immigration services scams. I'm just going to mention a couple of other cases at the FTC. One big one is Herbalife. While that Well, we don't say in our press release that it was targeting Hispanic immigrants. I know for a fact from a meeting I attended that many Hispanics paid money to get Herbalife distributorships and earned little or no money from them. So what the FTC did was we brought a case, we settled the case, and under that settlement, Herbalife will pay $200 million to compensate defrauded consumers. The money will be going out within the next couple of months, and a lot of the people that will be refunded will be found on the FTC, on Herbalife's list of consumers that purchased. But if you know of other consumers, there's information on our website about how to let us know so they can be refunded as well. Another case, consumer assistance, a debt relief scam targeting the Spanish-speaking consumers with an substantial upfront fee. They claimed they could reduce student debt by 50 to 70%. They didn't do it, and the case is ongoing. The last three cases also that I'm proud that we brought at the FTC, Centro Nacional, bogus debt collection scam. This was the one I think that the woman in the video was talking about. The court ordered these defendants to liquidate $776,000 worth of their assets to be returned to defrauded consumers and ban these defendants from debt collection and telemarketing, oral marketing, $1.3 million in refunds to consumers who were defrauded by a scam that offered people to purchase and resell brand name merchandise, which turned out to be shoddy, worthless stuff. FTC against DR Phone Communications, that was the prepaid calling card company that didn't provide the services that were promised. So this is my contact information. I also have business cards available for anyone who wants them. I'm happy to talk to you about scams you're seeing in the community, ways that we can help provide webinars or training or materials that can be bulk ordered. So feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk to you. Thank you so much.
A lot of information. It's nice to see the FTC so consciously working particularly on the vulnerability of the immigrant community. Our distinguished professor of law, Dan Kanstroom, I've asked to make some comments, put this in a larger context. Certainly as a founder of our Asylum and Immigration Clinic and also of our Human Rights Center, Dan has looked very carefully at a lot of the issues related to issues of immigrant rights. Dan?
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'll be brief. I just wanted to say at the outset that it's really uplifting, and I'm very happy to see the FTC doing this work. You may not know that the FTC is one of the oldest federal agencies we have. I believe it was created in 1914 as one of the first independent agencies, and this is a really important focus, so I commend the agency and you through them and them through you. You know, Ronald Reagan, who for some reason that I find mysterious has become an icon, used to say that the most terrifying words in the English language were, "We're from the federal government and we're here to help." But in fact, the federal government does help, although other aspects of the federal government are hurting immigrants mightily by deporting them. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about, the intersection of these two things. I've spent many years practicing law and teaching law, immigration law in particular, and I've seen many examples of immigrant exploitation. I really think one of the most egregious that I've seen over the years is these scams from fake notarios, fake lawyers, people who are purporting to be lawyers. And the reason for that is that it's incredibly poignant because they catch people at the lowest ebb of their power and the highest amount of despair and weakness that they have, and they're seeking help, and then they come to these people and not only do they not get help, but they get hurt, often in ways that are impossible or extremely difficult and expensive to untangle. The American Bar Association has focused on this recently, and I just wanted to read to you something that came from an ABA report. Individuals, this is a quote, individuals who represent themselves as qualified to offer legal advice or services concerning immigration or other matters of law, who have no such qualification, routinely victimize members of immigration communities. Such representations can include false statements that the person is an attorney or a notario, as you heard, or that the individual is actually authorized to represent immigrants before the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, that the individual is qualified or is a legal assistant or has a court license or any number of things like that. And this can have severe implications. As the ABA continues, in many cases the work performed by such individuals results in missed deadlines. Now my words, that's a particularly pernicious problem because the other federal agency that's involved in this, USCIS or ICE or Homeland Security more broadly or the Department of Justice, are incredibly rigid and unforgiving about things like missed deadlines or having the wrong form or the wrong fees. So what might be a small mistake if you were dealing with an agency that had more of a flexibility, let's say, not to mention heart, can be like a death penalty in this setting. And also they can miss opportunities to obtain legal residency or can actually get deported. I had a case many years ago that I was thinking about when I was preparing for this. I had a couple from Brazil who came to my office, and they were well-educated people, actually. One of them was a scientist, and the other had been also in the medical profession in Brazil. And they came and they said they just wanted to retain me to look over the papers that had been filed by their New York lawyer because they were here and it had been a long time. They hadn't heard anything, and would I take a look at the papers? And so they didn't actually have all the papers, but I managed to get the papers from the relevant federal agency. And I looked at them. This was a married couple with 3 beautiful young children who they were completely dedicated to. And they said, all we want to do is make sure that this is going to work out for the kids. So I looked at the paper, and let's just call this couple Joe and Mary. And I got separate papers, and what the papers indicated was that both Joe and Mary were in the process to get green cards, but they were in the process to get green cards because they had apparently said they were married to other people. So there were 2 marriage cases that had been filed in New York relating to 2 totally different people. So I called the couple back and I said, what is this? How is this possible? And they said, no, that's not right. We applied for work authorization through this notario in New York, and then he said he would fill out the papers, so we signed them. Turned out he had made up this entire thing. He had created these 2 other people, pretended my clients were married to each of them. There was no way this could ever be successful, and he had charged them $6,000 for this service, which this is, we're talking about maybe 15 years ago. That is a lot of money now. It was even more money then. So I had the job of trying to unravel this and fix it. And luckily I was able to do it through focusing on the fact that they were so innocent, and that the one thing they had always told me was that it was all for the children. And what this scam artist had not done was included the children on either person's application, which I made the argument that proved that they didn't know what they were signing when they signed it, because if they were involved in the scam, they would have at least tried to keep the children with one or the other, and they didn't do that. So we were able to get them green cards, but it cost them a lot of money for my time, and of course it was incredibly stressful. And so that's just one example. So I think the backstory here that I would just highlight in the little time that I want to take up, because I know you have some other excellent speakers to hear from, is that this type of fraud floats in a sea of very complicated, really, oppression relating to immigration enforcement in this country. You have such a harsh mechanism of immigration law and immigration enforcement for many people that they're peculiarly subject to these kind of things because they will try anything to regularize their status. They're just really desperate. And I think that it's very important, as I said, and I commend the FTC for doing this work, but it's really only the first step. What we need for this particular type of fraud is a recognition of a right to counsel in immigration proceedings. That's the background legal question. And I just wanted to tell you something from an excellent recent report, which I would recommend that you read, by Ingrid Eagley, who teaches at UCLA, and her colleague Steve Schaefer, that was prepared for the American Immigration Council. They reviewed over 1.2 million deportation cases decided over a 6-year period, and they examined the lack of counsel in immigration courts. what they found was that 63% of all immigrants go to court. Now, this is not even the scenario that I was talking about. This is the scenario where a person's already been caught by federal agents and is put in deportation proceedings. 63% have no lawyer. Detained immigrants, those who are arrested and held, and by the way, many of them are held without bail, no right to bail, 86% attend court hearings without an attorney. Now, you may or may not know of a case called Gideon versus Wainwright from the early 1960s. That holds that any criminal defendant, virtually any criminal defendant who faces even the hypothetical chance of any jail time, has the absolute right to appointed counsel. And of course, there are big problems in those systems and they're often underfunded, but still the right is there. But non-citizens don't have that right. So what's the effect of this? They found that having an attorney is strongly associated with positive outcomes. Represented immigrants in detention who had a custody hearing were 4 times more likely to be released from detention than people who did not have a lawyer, 44% to 11%. Detained immigrants with counsel were nearly 11 times more likely to seek relief from deportation. That's like asylum or various discretionary mechanisms. That was 32% who applied for such relief versus 3% of the unrepresented who applied for such relief. So 11 times more, et cetera. And the moral of that story is what you seek is what you get. So represented immigrants were much more likely to obtain the immigration relief sought, obviously, and the statistics are really, really stunning. Represented immigrants who were never detained were nearly 5 times more likely than their unrepresented counterparts to obtain relief, 63% to 13%. So in sum, these people with counsel were much more likely to have their cases terminated, to be released from detention, and to get the relief that they sought. I won't burden you with any more of the statistics, but I recommend that you look at the report. You can get it on the website of the American Immigration Council, the executive director of which, by the way, is a former student of ours, Beth Worland, who came through our immigration law program and is doing excellent work. So I commend the FTC tremendously. I'm really glad you came down from New York to join us here. But it's just a step in line of things that I think other federal agencies and our courts could do to ameliorate some of the really harsh practices that are out there. Thank you very much.
See if this mic works. Mary Holper, our professor in the clinical program, running the immigration clinic here at the school, has certainly been a champion for the issues of mandatory detention and other ways in which the system itself has, I think, worked adversely to the benefit of the immigrant community. Mary, thank you for taking time to put a context of our response and responsibilities.
Thank you, Westy, and thank you so much, Robin, for coming, and to the FTC for taking up this important issue. So I also appreciate the use of alternative media. Not that I do this myself, because I'm not a Twitter, Facebook person, but like the novellas, the videos, the audio, I mean, I think that's incredibly effective for reaching the communities who may not be able to read English or Spanish. So, so congratulations to the FTC in a way. Now, in terms of why is this happening? Why are the immigrant populations vulnerable? So lack of knowledge about our system. I mean, if you look at, or discussing some of the examples that you talked about, you know, the IRS would normally send you a letter. Most of us would know that. A lot of people who've grown up here would know the IRS sends a letter, they don't have someone call you. But how would you know that if you just arrived? And also, this is a population, if you think of the 11 million undocumented who live in a shadow economy. So why should they think that the laws that apply to the non-shadow economy even apply to them? So there's very good reason for them to realize or to think the laws don't apply to me, and which of course is the reason why they're a vulnerable population. And you know, the other thing too, and I had a conversation with Matt Brooks, who is a BC Law alum. He's working at the Greater Boston Legal Services as a fellow doing consumer protection and doing consumer protection outreach. And he was saying, you know, even consumer law is this very new, young area of law that people don't realize is a thing. So when you go out into the communities, and maybe going out into the immigrant communities, people are somewhat familiar with the, okay, I have a right to remain silent. That might be a right that people are familiar with. The idea that I have a right to recourses if I've been defrauded, there's a government agency who might want to try to help me with this. could be just completely foreign to many vulnerable populations in addition to the immigrant population. So that's just another thing that he highlighted as why this is such an important issue. And at the end, I'm going to give you his contact information because he said he and the Greater Boston Legal Services unit that he works in is willing to go out there and give trainings to the community themselves, to the people who are working with the community on issues such as credit reporting fraud, what to do if, you know, your student small claims court, what to do if you suspect notario fraud, what effect does a fighting eviction have on your credit reports, you know, guarding against scams, foreclosure scams. So there's just, you know, he outlined, I think, 5 or 6 different types of scams that you've heard from Robin about today that target the immigrant communities in particular. I, of course, think immigration scams. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And the example that Professor Kanstroom said about the couple who had allegedly been married to 2 other people is something that, of course, you see and you hear about and you fear for your clients. And this is one of the reasons why I'm always asking my students when they represent clients, get that record from the agency, see what's been filed in the case, because there might be this whole backstory that you don't know about, and here's a good example of a couple who didn't even realize what had happened in their case. But the other thing that the presentation made me think of is the other areas of immigration law where victims are protected. So we have protections built into our immigration law for victims of violent crime, victims of trafficking, and victims of domestic violence. So for victims of violent crime and victims of trafficking, it's called U visas and T visas. They have to have been a victim of a certain type of crime, and then they have to have been helpful to law enforcement in the prosecution or investigation of that crime. So why not expand that to include victims of fraud, is one question that I put out there. I mean, that's a question that Congress may be able to better address by amending the U visa you know, list of who's protected by that. But another possible fix, and we've seen this from the Obama administration, is deferred action. That's executive action of the type that he announced for the Dreamers, the kids in 2012. He announced it was stopped in the courts for the parents of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents. It's basically the executive saying unilaterally, don't deport people, and you know, you can give them work permits too. That could do amazing things to make the community come out of the shadows and report fraud, report scams. So that's just another suggestion that I have. And third is in immigration law, there's this whole notion of ineffective assistance of counsel, and it's used a lot as a defense if you've missed a deadline, like you have a 1-year filing deadline for asylum, and there's an ineffective assistance of counsel defense against that. If your lawyer, you know, didn't tell you about asylum, advised you not to apply. There's also an effective assistance of counsel that comes up when someone's been ordered deported in absentia. So we have a system in immigration law that says if you don't show up for your hearing, you will be deported in absentia. It doesn't matter that you didn't get notice of that hearing. You know, you provided an address to DHS when you got released from custody, but you didn't also provide that same address to the court. You could be ordered deported because you didn't show up for that hearing because nobody told you about that hearing. So one of the ways you reopen that is ineffective assistance of counsel claim. The problem is that the Board of Immigration Appeals has said that that ineffective assistance of counsel concept doesn't apply when it's not an attorney. So ineffective assistance of counsel at the hands of a notario, even though it has the same impact on the immigrant community, does not matter in the eyes of the Board of Immigration Appeals. So I would suggest, obviously this would be more of a suggestion to the board, is change that interpretation, because of course the benefit of that is it brings to light through a different government agency, the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is situated within the Department of Justice, the fraud that is happening. And it of course then can be an opportunity for them to share the information with the FTC. So I don't know if you have sort of a liaison between these two agencies, but.
Well, the Piney Group,
Yeah.
you know, we have a liaison with USCIS there.
Great.
So,
But
yes.
the court is another one, because the court sees the scams, it sees the, I mean, as I mentioned, they see many, many motions that deal with ineffective assistance of counsel. And so that can be both by lawyers, by non-lawyers. You know, as I mentioned, they wouldn't recognize it as an effective assistance of counsel if it was by a non-lawyer, but they're the ones who are literally receiving in the filings on motions to reopen for ineffective assistance of counsel a bar complaint that's been filed against the attorneys. Why can't that be shared with the FTC if you show repeated attorneys who are defrauding the immigrant communities? Because that essentially becomes the only way back into court for many people, or the only way to get past that deadline. So those are some of my very brief remarks. Yes.
And Mary, on the Piney Group, we have people that are involved in the bar admissions
Yes.
area, that they,
Of course, yeah.
they can get people disbarred for,
Right.
for defrauding immigrants.
Yeah.
And we also have people from the district attorney's offices, and they regularly bring cases about immigration services frauds.
Great, great. Well, that is all wonderful to hear. This is just sort of another suggestion for cooperation because, as I mentioned, for the immigrant community, it's a lot about access to a work permit, access to legal status, access to getting back into court. So for them, it's often I can't talk to the federal government. I can't talk to the officials. It's scary. I don't want to. I don't know who I can trust, essentially. Which is why they trust a fraudster who might be within their immigrant community in the first place. So it does require a little bit of enticing, and that's the reasoning behind the U visa, the reasoning behind amnesty in the Reagan era was you basically. It was sort of there was a confidentiality provision. We're not going to be, and the U visa, they would say, even if you're unsuccessful, we're not going to turn you over to the immigration court. So there is, so I would just throw out their ideas and how to entice the immigrant community to come out of the shadows. Thank you.
Those are very practical suggestions, Mary. I think we're recording today's session, so it's available for us to use in classrooms afterwards. It will also be available for streaming on the Immigrant Integration Lab's website. So if you want to make further use of this. We have, I thought it was important for us to ask the question of what is Massachusetts doing about this issue, and our very proactive Attorney General, Maura Healey, was kind enough to send a recently emancipated student from Boston University who has spent the 2 years since he got out of there as a very active political figure working for Seth Moulton, for Elizabeth Warren, for Senator Markey, and now today to represent the Attorney General. Tim Depin, welcome. Nice to have you with us.
All right, thank you, and thank you so much for having us here. I think it's been a great presentation so far, specifically from the FTC. A lot of what we're seeing here in Massachusetts is clearly also going on nationwide in immigrant communities. So, and cognizant of the fact that we do want to leave enough time for questions, I'm going to try to be pretty brief, and I kind of want to focus what I'm saying on the work that the office is doing to get our resources out there for immigrant communities, because we have long looked at scams, looked at financial fraud, looked at a number of things, but we were realizing that they weren't targeting some of our most vulnerable communities. And that's, the Attorney General does a number of things. But specifically important to Maura Healey, our current Attorney General, is protecting the most vulnerable populations of Massachusetts from consumer fraud, from workers' fraud, and other aspects like that. And we were realizing that, unfortunately, for a whole number of reasons, we weren't getting it into the new American communities. So when the Attorney General first took office, she created the Community Engagement Division. That's the division that I'm a part of. That division is tasked with bringing the resources of the office, which are many, out to the people who they could most benefit. And because unfortunately, we're often inundated with requests from people who have used us before, people who know that we exist. Those people who certainly do have problems and do have issues that we want to help with, but we realized there was a big chunk of the population that we were missing. And further from that, just last month, we started New Americans and Immigrants Advisory Council. Now, this council is made up from community members across the Commonwealth, specifically in your higher immigration areas, the Boston area, the Worcester area, the Springfield area, down on the South Coast. And we were able to get leaders from that area to join us for a quarterly meeting where we could talk about a number of issues. And the purpose of that is kind of twofold, and I think it really gets to the crux of why it can be difficult for our office to reach these immigrant communities. The first is we want to get information in. As has been mentioned previously, immigrant communities unfortunately are much less likely to report potential scams, potential fraud to us as a government agency for a number of reasons. One, when you're an immigrant in this country and you don't speak English, depending on the language, maybe if you speak Spanish, you might assume that somebody will have resources for you. But if you speak Portuguese, if you speak Vietnamese, if you speak Mandarin or any number of languages, your entire life in this country has been interactions with people who are not speaking your language unless you're directly in your community. So for them to make that call to us, even if by somehow they get that phone number, oftentimes they can assume they're not going to be able to help them. And secondly, and specifically, we have a fair labor division that deals with workers' rights disputes, wage and hour disputes. There's a fear there that, if they report something like this and their immigration status is kind of murky, that they're reporting it to a government agency. And the Attorney General has been clear from the beginning, we serve residents of the Commonwealth, not citizens. We serve residents of the Commonwealth. If you live here and you've worked a job here and you're not being paid, well, that's something you should report to the Attorney General's office, but that can be very difficult for people. That can be tough. And so we want to have this council for information in. We know that these council members are more likely to get the reports from their community of what's going on, whether that's a large scam that's targeting a whole number of people, which is potentially could be in, with the FTC, Robert has mentioned a couple of those, or if it's just a single person, who's being affected by an employer, purchasing a vehicle, things like that. We want that information in, and we know this is a good way to get it in. But secondly, we also want that information to go back out through the council. When we do find out about these scams, and we have taken action, if we found out that the IRS scam, I think, is a great example. The IRS scam, we get that in a lot, and we can send out a press release, we can tweet about it, but we're doing all those things in English, and we're doing those things to the places that we know and we've used in the past. And unfortunately, they may not be reaching those immigrant communities. And on top of that, these communities might be the people who are least likely to know that the federal government's not going to, or the IRS is not going to treat you like that. They're not going to call and harass you about that type of thing. And then on top of that, they're not getting our information. So we're using this council in a number of ways. We want the information in, we want the information out, because most importantly, what we want to do is change how our office is perceived. Unfortunately, when you carry the moniker Attorney General, you're thought of first and foremost as a law enforcement agency, and that's a big part of the office. And our office does great work defending state agencies and taking action on behalf of the Commonwealth, working as the Attorney General. But a lot of the office, whole divisions of the office, are specifically there for consumer, worker protections, civil rights protections. And because we're the Attorney General, we do feel that there are times where people are not coming to us for that reason. So, we have this council, and we want to change our face, change the name, so that we can reach these communities. They will come to us, and we can truly serve the whole Commonwealth, and not just serve sort of the slice of the Commonwealth that it's easy to serve. And so that is the most important thing to us, because it all, at the end of the day, I think, comes down to the issue of access, specifically in the immigrant community, and a number of others have alluded to it. A lot of times they're particularly likely to fall into fraud scenarios because they're not able to get the services that many of us are. They are the ones who go to the local shop to buy a car where the cars aren't really that good, because they don't know. They don't know they don't know some of the protections, and on top of that are less likely to refer it to us. We've talked a lot about unauthorized practice of immigration law. That's one thing that we've done as well. We recently took action against a law firm in Waltham that was doing that work. We were able to turn just over $100,000 back to people. But we also see it specifically now in the area of home refinancing. People will buy a home, will need to refinance their home. You or I might know that we need to go down to the bank and we can talk to somebody, and even though, we don't understand, may not understand everything that we need to do, there's someone, an expert there that can talk us through it. In immigrant new American communities, they can turn to sort of a local person within the community who says that they can take care of it, sounds like they know what they're talking about, can get them the money to refinance their home, and what they end up doing is signing over the deed to their house. They sign over the deed to their house and they lose their house. And, our job now is try to get the information out there, because with so many aspects of fraud, fixing it after the fact can be very difficult. Whether it is wiring someone, $1,000 on a green dot on an iTunes card, they might be gone forever. But if we can get in front of it, get to that prevention aspect, that's what we want to do. And that's what the Attorney General's office is focused on. That's why I'm happy to be here today, because we really do want to get out there into the community, make sure that the resources of our office are known, and make sure that we can get information about potential scams out there before they affect too many people. And with that, I want to turn it over if we have questions at the end, but I just wanted to give a quick remark.
Actually, can I just add one quick thing to that? Massachusetts was a leader in this. This idea is so incredibly important of having a rigid separation of functions among agencies. Mike Dukakis was at the forefront of that. Jim Shannon, who was a former Attorney General, said, if you have a workplace injury and you want to report it, we will not turn you over, to the immigration authorities. We do our job, they do their job. We don't, because it seems, you might think, well, agencies should cooperate with each other, but this is an arena where it's the exact opposite. You need to have those important lines drawn, and Massachusetts was really in the forefront of that, and I think it's paid important dividends. On the federal level, one of the worst things that happened in the Bush administration, you had ICE agents impersonating OSHA inspectors, going into factories in North Carolina saying we're doing an inspection for workplace hazards, then rounding people up and deporting them. Well, that destroyed the work of both agencies, because then the workers wouldn't trust OSHA either, and they end up breathing coal dust or cotton dust or whatever, and they don't report it. Sorry, I just wanted to throw it out.
Don't be sorry, those are the specifics. That's where the power of knowing what we need to know, as well as where we can make some difference. Time is yours for some questions. If you'd like to ask a question, we have a wonderful panel. It's been rich already. Please.
Hi, I work at Greater Boston Legal Services in the Welfare Law Unit in immigrant benefits. And one of the things I see a lot is that the first generation, like the young people, like the youth, they become the conduit for their parents. They get all the power, basically. And my question is, I know that you said you went into high schools and stuff. I'm wondering if that aspect is considered, like if there's been other targeting specifically to the young people, and if that dynamic is at all addressed. Because so many times, and one other part of that question is sometimes, I'm not an immigration person, but sometimes in unraveling it for welfare reasons, the youth find out things that they didn't know, shouldn't know, nobody's father, domestic violence. So have you guys thought about that at all, and there's other things to address it? Is that relevant?
It's a great, I think it's a really, really great point, and I have to say that, there's a lot of people who do work, sort of trying to do outreach presentations to lots of different communities, but I think focusing on high school students is an excellent idea, and in fact, Matt, your colleague, I might give him a follow-up email to suggest, exactly, to suggest that as a potential place of outreach.
Thanks.
It is hard because it does put yet another burden on the kids who are already taking on a pretty heavy burden to perform the services of interpreting for their family, and then to also sort of feel like, okay, now I also have to make sure that I detect fraud scams, and it, obviously it like completely flips the power dynamic that might have existed back in the home country of like the parent being the more powerful and the child being less powerful. But no, I think it's a really good outreach point.
And I'm going to do a couple of presentations for a teacher, high school teacher. So if they're interested, I would include that information as well.
You know, we used to do this in the clinic for years. I went into Cambridge and Latin High School with teams of law students to meet with high school students, and I found it wasn't, the teachers were good in facilitating things, but it was the guidance counselors, the college advisors, you know, the people behind the scenes who could talk confidentially with the students, and then you would hear these stories coming out. So that's a,
Guidance counselors.
yeah, that's an important group to reach out to.
And a program like City Connects that has a school social worker that's specifically non-academic.
Yeah, yeah.
To deal with family issues would be the target population for us. I think a Know Your Rights campaign by the Attorney General, specifically around some of these vulnerabilities, would be great. Where in the workplace is it mandated that this kind of information be posted? We see enough about washing our hands. Let's put a few more things in the, outside the restroom and address the issues of what we need to, what employees need to know and where they can get assistance.
We should still wash our hands.
Yeah.
I saw a hand question. Yes.
No, I was just going to comment, as you said, City Connects. When I worked with them, we did a clinic to register all children for kindergarten. And as people were bringing in their paperwork as proof of address, we started noticing the trends with the credit cards. And just how a lot of the immigrant parents have been caught in these really complex, you know, just, you try to just look at the address, but you can't help but look at the interest rates that they were paying. And the law school came in as part of our kindergarten registration process to do a law clinic, and we would identify red flags, and they would go talk confidentially to someone, and it was fantastic.
And I will say, as a parent of someone who has sat there waiting in line to register my kids for kindergarten, you got nothing better else to do. So you might as well listen to a presentation, because it is a long time you're sitting there in January at the BPS Welcoming Center.
Is City Connect exclusively in Massachusetts?
It is a Boston College initiative for school
great.
social workers, but it is spreading across the country. It's now in a variety of states.
Thank you.
There's yesterday were the hearings on having an identity card for Boston, which will obviously be a magnet to draw people who have documentation issues. It'd be also a good opportunity for us to figure out how to incorporate this with new urban identity cards so that people, when they get the card, learn a lot about how to protect themselves from fraud.
New York City has such a
Yes,
card.
right, one of the first. Bloomberg's was always the front edge of this type of thing. Other questions? Stories and anecdotes? Yes.
It's really mind-boggling that 86% of the court hearings are without lawyers. So could you tell us if it is because they can't afford to get a lawyer? In other words, affordability is what I'm thinking. Is it because they can't afford, or is it because they're not aware of the importance of?
No, it's purely because they cannot afford a lawyer, and the Supreme Court held in a series of cases in the late 19th century that deportation proceedings are not the same as criminal proceedings, so the constitutional law went in two directions. So in criminal law, through the 20th century, there became this recognition that poor defendants have a right to appointed counsel even if they can't afford a lawyer. But every time people have tried to bring that case in deportation, they've run up against this idea that it's a civil proceeding, not a criminal proceeding, and therefore they don't have a right. Now, there is some evolution of this. There's a very powerful movement in New York, actually, an Immigrant Justice Corps that has achieved some private funding and some public funding to provide counsel. There are people in Massachusetts who are working on this in the public defender's office. I don't know what Maura Healey's position is on it, but I would bet, and I'm willing to say publicly, that she would support it one way or another at the end of the day. There are other public officials, probably not including the governor, who would support it. But it does cost a lot of money to do, and then, of course, the criminal defense system is in need of resources as well. It's hard to make the case to people that we're going to raise your taxes in order to provide counsel to people facing deportation. I think I could make that case, and they've made it in other jurisdictions. But as of right now, it's a matter of you cannot afford a lawyer, you can't get one. And in fact, even if you can afford a lawyer, there's a whole other set of problems. I mean, I'm sitting on a judgment actually against a lawyer in New York that I won for over $300,000 for legal malpractice. That was an actual lawyer who had come in a telephonic hearing in Boston and said that his client just wanted to go back to Bangladesh. The client had never had a conversation with this guy. And fortunately, we stopped that, and then we sued the lawyer. In between, he was indicted criminally, so we're never going to get any money out of him, but he's doing some time in a nice, comfortable prison in New York. But, I mean, there's also an issue with raising the level of practice among the lawyers, too. So we have a lot of work to do.
And just to add to that, getting free legal services is incredibly difficult. I know because I provide free legal services to a very, very small subset of the people who need them through the clinic. Immigration cases are incredibly complicated. For those who are detained, they move incredibly quickly because you're supposed to have, you know, if the bail hearing might be happening in 2 weeks, the merits hearing is going to be happening in 1 month or 2 months, and that's like a trial to prepare for. Your client can't do anything to help himself because he's sitting in Plymouth County House of Corrections, can't get any evidence for him. You got to collect calls to get, you know, you have to drive down to visit him. So it is incredibly, incredibly burdensome to do free representation, which is why there are so many nonprofits who don't do it. You know, and even for the private bar who wants to help out pro bono, it's really, really, really complicated. So it's hard for them to really develop the expertise in it that the good immigration lawyers already have.
Please.
The one thing that hasn't been mentioned today, I don't think, is the added context of the political conversation going on right now around immigrants and their status in this country, which I think contributes to staying in the background or in the shadows. It strikes me, this conversation, I feel helpless, or I feel like it's a helpless situation in just the sense that it's a perfect storm of so many factors that keep them from taking advantage of resources that are very difficult to come to learn about at all. Anecdotally, I spent some time with a gentleman who came a year ago from the Congo, and by my going to spend time with him once a week, I'm learning a ton about services, his anxieties. We're starting the green card process, but he lives with 6 other guys, and you know, he speaks Swahili, so I was looking for Swahili. We have a lot of challenges. He has a lot of challenges, and doesn't understand really. And it is. I worry all the time about, and I'm trying to find out. I'm worried that he's already being scammed. Doesn't want to put his money. The money he gets from Social Security is all in his pocket all the time. And I told him he can't. You know, every time we go to CVS, he pulls out this wad of cash, and you know, I'm explaining to him that's not a good practice, but he won't put it in the bank. You know, so anything from getting his prescriptions to getting legal help. So the question just becomes for me is lawyers, yes, but just advocacy. Just maybe at the level of the Attorney General's office, who are the people who are advocating? Because he definitely feels very much alone. And I volunteer through Catholic Services, Catholic Charities, but even there, after 1 year, the services pretty much drop, and he's on his own.
One of the chief allies in this, I talked to the Chinese Progressive Association in the heart of Chinatown, is to find the folks in the ethnic community who have good voices of authority and voices of justice, and to be sure that they're equipped with the information so that they do programming that relates to our subject today, but also uses their ethnic media and any kind of activities to continue to invite people to learn about everything from self-protection to the abuses that can happen to people with the best of intentions. Yeah. So I think we have a responsibility. There's definitely a shortage of legal counsel in the community in these areas for the reasons discussed, and there's definitely an absence of material that's been coming out. But with the FTC's material, with the Attorney General and the new counsel, I think that we have an environment that's going to provide more, but we have to be activists, I think, in order to be sure that the materials become used by those who can bring it to the community. This is a valuable time. I appreciate that you've given up lunch to be here, or you had lunch. If you haven't had lunch, maybe there's something left. But to spend the time together thinking about something that I hope is not your personal reason for being in the room. If it is, there are friends that we can point you to But as a community of advocates, we have an opportunity, I think, to bring a significant voice of justice forward. Our
And
thanks to the panel.
I just want to add, because there we go, Matt Brooks, he's the alum of ours who is willing to do the outreach. We already have it, Robin.
That's great.